Welcome to the Monocle Banking Podcast, your guide into the world of finance, economics and policy with some of the most influential voices in the industry. I'm your host, Michael Avery, and today we've got a very special episode lined up for you. Despite all the difficulties, said The Economist in its observation on South Africa's elections recently, South Africa still has a fighting chance. Now that the pivotal elections have come and gone, how does South Africa win the battle, so to speak, then? We've seen a veritable Pandora's box of coalition options been opened at the national and provincial government levels, and it will be a strong test of South Africa's political leadership to dispel the big cloud of uncertainty that has descended. But given all of this, really, the big question is how might the economic arithmetic shape up? Because ultimately what we need to do is get the economy going again. The Centre for Development and Enterprise, CDE, released a list of 5 priorities for South Africa's yet-to-be-formed new government, and which the think tank also argues should help guide ongoing coalition negotiations as well. The priorities have been widely canvassed, and our guest today is Ann Bernstein, Executive Director of the CDE and noted public policy scholar, to unpack the CDE has dubbed Agenda 2024. Ann, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on. I've got to ask you firstly about the election outcome and what you made of the electorate voting the ANC below 50% for the first time.
Hello, Michael, and your listeners. It's great to be with you again. Well, let's put it this way. I think this was a massive vote of no confidence in the ANC and the way in which it's been ruling South Africa, and deservedly so, in my view. Unfortunately, a lot of voters went and voted for President Zuma's party, or MK, whatever this is, which is still not clear to me. One sees pictures of MK supporters with not a T-shirt, but a polo shirt with President Zuma and President Putin. Sort of sitting, talking to each other. So I don't think we know very much about this party, but a large number of voters, especially in Natal, in KZN, went off and voted for them. So this makes this both a moment of real opportunity for South Africa, but also of enormous danger. And at some point you have to ask yourself why voters are doing what they do. Was this just a protest vote? But it's very hard to tell. My view is, in some respects, the weakness of former President Ramaphosa in both how he's been running South Africa for the last 6 years and in failing to, in politics, if you're going to take on a powerful opponent, you need to do that decisively. And I don't think President Ramaphosa did that with Jacob Zuma. He didn't explain to the country either what Jacob Zuma had done to South Africa and why he was party to getting rid of him as president. So I think all of this is coming back to bite us and just put the country in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, I think that's a good characterization of where we find ourselves, and I tend to agree with you. The indecisiveness of the president is something that he'll clearly be rueing now. It's too early to tell exactly which way the coalition chips may fall, but one hopes that whoever's around that table will be putting the critical state of the economy front and center. We saw first quarter GDP growth come in at a very tepid negative 0.1%, a quarter-on-quarter contraction. That follows a 0.1% quarter-on-quarter growth in the fourth quarter. Our economy is flatlining, and this really brings me to your report, Agenda 2024. And you've done lots of research and you've done lots of work with Ricardo Hausman and others, but this agenda looks to be a really clear, concise, robust plan for South Africa's new government. Can you just give us a brief overview of these 5 urgent priority areas that you've identified and why these are so critical for the country's turnaround?
So for the past 6 months, we've been flat out with experts throughout the country and building on our own work and international experts as well, thinking about what are the catalytic priorities to help turn South Africa around. And when a country is failing on so many fronts and confronting challenges in so many areas, this is a difficult choice. Now, you might want me to say, here's a growth strategy for South Africa, and I wish we could do that. But the problem is things have got so bad that you have to stop falling before you can rise. So we've been very influenced by that, and that you have to fix some absolutely basic issues before we can get to where we all want to go. So that's a sort of frame that's influenced us in choosing the 5 priority areas that we are going to have already and are busy developing action proposals in. So the 5 areas are, firstly, to fix the state. This is 3 words that hide a very complex challenge. We've decided on 2 very specific areas of action. The first is to look at the presidency and the cabinet, the very center of government. And next week, in fact, we will issue our first action report, which has recommendations on how to reorganize the presidency, which has grown and grown and grown, and to streamline the cabinet. So we're proposing the cabinet should move from 30 ministers to some 19 or 18 ministers. We're busy finalizing that, but much smaller. It's been impossible to make decisions for many reasons, but one of them is that there are so many members of the cabinet, one of the largest in the world, and this needs to be streamlined. And we've tried to put up a recommendation of how to streamline it in alignment with what we think the priorities for the country should be. So fixing the state, very important. That's number 1. The second one is dealing with, let's call it, while the state is weak, it cannot play the basic role that we need, and that makes it even more imperative to open up markets and free up markets and firms and even civil society in some areas to do much more. So a very strong focus on actions to open up the economy far more. Michael, you and I have talked about some of these issues before.
Yeah.
But we're, so I won't go into that in too much detail. There will be an action report on that area. We're really saying you've got to let the market free it up, step aside. The state must step aside. We're in favor of public-private partnerships, and the new draft regulations seem to be pointing in the right direction. But this is only one part of the puzzle. You can't have a partnership with a weak and incompetent state and one that is inconsistent on policy. So we try and deal with a number of issues, including we think the new government needs to indicate a much different attitude to the private sector. And obviously, private firms are not perfect. They can't fix everything in South Africa, of course not. But we do think that market-led growth can really transform South Africa much more quickly and more effectively for very many people if we let it rip. So that's important, as is competition. So the first area is fix the state. Second area is drive growth and development by freeing up markets and competition. Third area, we need to build a new approach to poverty and inequality and inclusion. The fourth area, we need to deal with our fiscal crisis. And the fifth area is we need to strengthen the rule of law.
And those
are our 5.
Would run concurrently.
These would run concurrently. Let me make 2 other points. One big theme runs through all 5 of these, which is leaders matter, people matter. The very first step of reform is to get the right people in senior positions in the state, all sort of parts of the state, and we will be coming with mission critical jobs, we're calling it, but that's the first step of reform. So leaders and senior people really, really matter. That's a big theme underlying all of this. The second is just to say that accompanying this would have to be a legislative agenda, because there are some laws that need repeal, some that need amendment, in a whole range of our 5 big areas. So a legislative agenda underpins this as well.
Now, I think it's interesting for a number of reasons, because one might say that we drown in plans and we probably top the world. If there was a World Cup in developing plans, we're right up there, and it's all about execution and implementation. But we do have an opportunity, and I think it's a singular opportunity given what happened in the election outcome, to start with the very first item, number one on your agenda, and that's fix the state. And the reason I say that, and I'd like your thoughts on this, is that if you look at the German coalition model, they've been doing it for a lot longer than we have. They've perfected the art to some extent. But what they do is they get together as the various political parties, and they very much prefer substance over style. So they sit down and they say, right, what are the key issues that confront the German economy and the German nation more broadly? And how do we then propose we should try and structure the state to address those issues? So is it economic growth? Is it climate change? All of those things. And from there, they then craft a cabinet and a structure of the state to deal with it. And I think what we have at this opportunity, Anne, and you did stress at the launch that you'd like the coalition parties to think about this, is to use this thinking in their calculus as they sit down and say, right, what is an appropriate state? What does it look like? What is a trimmed-down cabinet that gives us the ability to tackle the triple challenges or whatever they are? How would you be advising the coalition to think about how it forms this state into something that's far more effective and capable to help address some of these issues around the appointment of people previously being based on party loyalty and not on the right people for the right job? Where would you like them to start?
Well, I think the first point we are making is that the negotiations taking place at the moment shouldn't just be about position and politics and power, but they have to be about priorities for action. And so I agree with you. Our system's unused to this. In some ways, one would like a situation where there's an agreement on who's going to be the president and the speaker so that Parliament can move forward and perhaps on the budget, but then take time to do what the Germans do and agree a program of action. Because one of the things I am stressing is that this is not a normal time. The new government has to fix a country in crisis. So I agree with you about all of that. As I said, we're going to come with detailed action recommendations. This isn't a plan. This is a set of priority actions. And in terms of the state, we're talking about how to make the presidency a much more effective instrument to lead the government overall and the cabinet. And then we're making proposals about what's really important in terms of what the cabinet should focus on. How do you cut? And that's been heavily influenced by our view of priority actions.
DGs are effectively in the civil service, the CEOs basically. So there should clearly be a lot more attention on how and who is appointed into that critical role inside government in order to give effect to the program of government, surely.
Absolutely. There's not a lot we can do about the cabinet because constitutionally the president only has the right to appoint 2 members of his cabinet who are not members of parliament. So that constrains us somewhat. And we're saying that those 2 members should be carefully chosen to bring in expertise and experience in change management and technical, leadership qualities that we might not have in Parliament or from the group that the president can choose from. So that's one issue. The second is the DGs are vitally important and the teams they can build. I like to tell the story of Peru, where a man was appointed education minister for schooling and he took the job. He took the job on condition that he made the decisions about his team and that there was no politics. And the president of Peru allowed him to do that. Within 3 years, he had changed his top team. The top 60, 55% had been changed to be the effective people he thought he needed. He introduced basic reforms, not rocket science, exactly what we and other experts are saying should be done. And they managed to move up the international test by 12 countries.
Wow.
In a 3 to 5 year period. So that he got real results, but he had to get his own team. So DGs matter. They have to be excellent. We know that any political party all over the world will bring in some political advisors. That's fine. Not the American system, but whatever is reasonable. Each minister can have a political advisor or whatever the right number is. But it's the absolute body of the civil service, the leaders of each department the DGs, the deputy DGs, the top team have to be professionals who know what they're doing. They also have to be committed to a reform agenda, and they have to be honest. So we will be making proposals on, you read often about civil servants who've been suspended for reasons of wrongdoing, and they sit at their full salary doing nothing for years and years and years. We have to stop that. More importantly, we have to free up those positions and that money so we can put people of excellence, fit for purpose, to lead in critical departments. And we're saying this could be one big leap forward. We can't get rid of all the consequences of cadre deployment overnight, but we could start at the top. And then those leaders will in turn start to see who are the people of quality in the civil service they want to keep and how to move forward. So start at the top.
And I mean, that also comes back to your point on the issue of ethical leadership, which Rule Causa stressed at the launch of the agenda. Obviously, there's got to be an acknowledgement that if you don't have the right leaders in the right place, everything else is moot, as we've seen. And, the fish will then rot from the head. When it comes to driving growth, I'm really looking forward to releasing that full report. But just give us a sense of the direction you would like this to take, given the reform agendas that have started to emerge under Operation Vulindlela. I think it would be churlish not to recognize that OV has had some decent wins in energy. We're starting to see some emerge around the key network industries, around logistics in Transnet and our ports and rail. What would you like to see improved upon in the 7th administration when it comes to driving growth and development by freeing up markets and competition?
A very important question. Obviously, we're supporters of Operation Vulindlela. I think they've been an excellent innovation in a situation where the civil service doesn't work very well and where there are a few good people in the presidency and the treasury who are trying to get reform going. So now they have a list, and some of it's implemented properly and some of it's not implemented properly, not through their fault, but because of the structure of things. So I think one has to understand that. It's very important to think these issues through clearly. So if you look at the whole Transnet situation, a very complex situation, I don't think one can have simplistic slogans, but we do need to distinguish between choosing one company you concession something to versus competition. And we're going to be emphasizing the importance of bringing competition into the state-owned company sort of arena in a much more profound way. So there's some parts of our large state-owned companies that should be sold off and privatized. Some should remain in the state, but we've got to move away very clearly from the dominance of state monopolies because they have been incredibly inefficient and very expensive for the country. So competition is going to be a very important theme for us. I think the other theme is everyone likes to talk about red tape. And there were some people in my office recently, very senior people in organized business. And I said, well, what do you see as red tape exactly? We talk and talk and talk, but we never seem to make progress. What's the problem? Oh, no, they weren't crystal clear. They just, it's red tape. And I think it's my suspicion, and we're busy digging into this. My suspicion is a few things. One, if you've got a not great state, you then have lots of rules and regulations to try and protect both, public money and do the right thing, and here are the rules. But what we've done is we have so over-regulated that I think the state is full of check boxes, and that drives everyone mad.
Yeah.
And you couple that with incompetence and corruption, it's a terrible situation.
On that point, Anne, I've just got to share. I was chatting to a head of a small business on the show on Monday, and he said he couldn't register a company on CIPC this week because the Department of Home Affairs website was down. And again, that goes back to your capable state has got to align with, all of the rules and regulations that you're setting up for business to play by.
Exactly. And, you have to ask yourself, if you're starting a business, you want some basic health and safety and probably one or two other things. But how complicated is it, if you're a small business?
Yeah.
So it's almost like what are we doing with all of this? So that's one question. The second question is a lot of it relates to what, in general, we would argue is a failed and wrong approach to how to promote the empowerment of Black South Africans. And most people don't want to say this. We have to be honest about what is it we're trying to do here? What is the most effective way to empower Black people and bring them into the economy? So if you're looking at entrepreneurs or you're looking at other parts of this, let's be honest about what's working and what isn't, and how much this affects the complications of doing business in South Africa. So we can go into a lot of detail. I think that's a really important area to which we can add localization and preferential procurement. And we're going to come with recommendations, certainly on preferential procurement, which is a very large part of how the state spends our money.
Yeah.
And is not working well, to put it mildly. Has been a seat of corruption, and often people are paid and they don't deliver the housing project or the bridge or the road. So there are big problems here, and there are some experts who are saying there are big savings for us there. So that's an important area we're digging around in, and will come with precise actions.
And that goes hand in glove with dealing with the fiscal crisis to some extent, because if you're dealing with a ballooning public debt, and we know Treasury has said we're going to aim for a primary surplus this year, but it still requires either reining in or cutting spending or redirecting spending. And one way to do that is through public procurement, to ensure that you actually are getting the best bang for every tax rand that you collect. I just want to come to the issue of mass inclusion, which I think is very important. And I know it's something that's very close to your heart, having really done a lot of research into unemployment and employment, and youth unemployment in particular in this country. And I think labour market reforms are critical to that. Change the labour laws, make it easier to hire and equally to fire for non-performance, collective bargaining and the extension of that to non-signatories. It's very difficult for small firms. The problem, though, and the challenge, and while I agree with a lot of what you've said on this front, the major stumbling block will be securing the buy-in of key partners in labour. How do you see this particular political moment enabling this difficult conversation to be had with one of the ANC's key alliance partners, but also one can question an alliance partner that really didn't bring much to the table at this election? It certainly didn't bring the working class and the poor to come out and vote for it. So it does look like COSATU and the ANC's Labour allies are weakened.
Well, my instinct is to agree with you. I think we need to see who did vote, who didn't vote, and who voted for whom. That's going to be very interesting. But, at some points, leaders in a country have to act. They have to make decisions that are in the national interest and that do cause discomfort among some other interests. And we've held on to this issue for, there are many reasons why South Africa has probably the highest unemployment rate in the world. One of the reasons has to do with collective bargaining being extended to people who are not sitting around the bargaining table, small firms, new firms, and often rural firms or non-metropolitan firms. That is a big factor, and it's outrageous that actually you can extend a deal that you and I make to people who weren't party to it at all. So that's one issue. How much impact that has, it's hard to calculate. I think a second area is, with so much youth unemployment, heading up to the late 60s, 70% of young people who want to work who cannot find a job, we have to make it easier for employers to hire people quickly, try them out. If it doesn't work out, let them go. So we've got to loosen that up, hiring and firing, if you're serious about bringing young people into the labor market. But at the end of the day, you've got to get growth. We can talk and talk and talk, but unless we're getting growth and we're incentivizing employment and removing barriers to employers employing people, we're not going to get the kind of job numbers that we have to strive for. So this is a really important area. I think if you read the ANC manifesto for the elections, they kind of have given up. They talk about 2.5 million job opportunities, which are state-funded jobs, normally short-term, part-time, 3 to 4 months. This could be a stopgap for a society like ours, but this is not how we're going to deal with unemployment. We've got to grow the economy. And I think that's another watchword for everything we're doing, which is you've got to say that is the top priority, and we will do nothing that will undermine growth.
Well, on that point, Anne, I'm really looking forward to the series of papers that you're going to be producing. That wraps up our discussion with you this week. Ann Bernstein, Executive Director of the CDE, noted public policy scholar. Thank you for taking us through the thinking around Agenda 2024 here on the Monocle Banking Podcast. Take care. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Monocle Banking Podcast. Remember to stay subscribed for more inspiring conversations with business leaders and innovators only on the Monocle Banking Podcast.